Good morning.
Good morning indeed. Welcome to that's not it. I just say good morning here. Good morning
Indeed.
indeed. Today is April something. April the 11th. And we'll be talking about a couple different interesting things this morning. We'll be continuing our conversation on conflict in the church. We're going to be focusing especially on bitterness and forgiveness. For all the bitter and forgivers out there. Anyway, we'll be talking about that, and we have some Q&A questions and one current event that is just hitting the news media pretty hotly in a very hot manner. So we'll be talking about that and more on the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I wanted to sing more today, Pastor June, because they do that on other podcasts, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang.
And I'm Eugene Kim.
That's the first time that you said your name in a very, very long time.
What should I have said?
Nothing else. That was great. So today we're going to be talking about conflict in the church and I guess more specifically bitterness and its dangers. And so maybe we could start there, Pastor Eugene. What does the Bible say about bitterness, and is it dangerous, and why? Can it be dangerous, and why? May it be?
May it be?
Yeah, may it be dangerous, and
Yeah.
why?
How about we start with the basic one, and then we'll go into some, extrapolations of that. Hebrews 12:15.
Hebrews 12:15. This is actually one of my favorite books of the Bible. Just FYI, if anyone was ever going to give me a gift. Hebrews 12:15 reads, "See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled."
Yeah. And then let's look up Simon the Magician.
This is regarding Simon the Magician. And this is Acts chapter 8, verses 18 to 23. Now, when Simon saw that the Spirit was given through the laying on of the apostles' hands, he offered them money, saying, "Give me this power also, so that anyone on whom I lay my hands may receive the Holy Spirit." But Peter said to him, "May your silver perish with you, because you thought you could obtain the gift of God with money. You have neither part nor lot in this matter, for your heart is not right before God. Repent, therefore, of this wickedness of yours, and pray to the Lord that if possible the intent of your heart may be forgiven you. For I see that you are in the gall of bitterness and in the bond of iniquity." And Simon answered, "Pray for me to the Lord, that nothing of what you have said may come upon me."
Yeah.
What kind of magic do you think he was doing? Card tricks?
Probably card tricks, yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. What do you think about it?
What do I think about it?
Yep.
It seems like bitterness is not good and it's dangerous. And so I'm wondering, why is it so dangerous?
Yeah, but how is Simon bitter?
It seems to me that he was a little bitter, like, oh, I didn't get the magic. You know what I mean? Like he's a little angry about it.
Yeah, I suppose. I think here, the reason why I like this text in particular, where bitterness is laid out, and then you don't actually see. So some people think like bitterness is, I don't know, you say like mean things or anything like that. I don't think Simon did that, right? What he did was he said, "Here, give me this power so I could do this. Here's some money." And then Peter said, what you read. I think bitterness has a lot to do with greed. I think they're inextricably tied together. And because that he was able to tie it together, Simon was able to see, this is a terrible thing that I asked for. Because in the end, people might not wonder why there is why there's such big hoopla around, why can't I just offer money to obtain a position in the church,
Mm-hmm.
I bet many of you heard dramatic pause for no reason. I bet many of you heard about perhaps stories of, people giving a lot and then therefore they became elders of the
Yeah.
church. People
Yeah.
who give become elders. And so what is going on there? And I don't think it's any surprise that if you become an elder, because what happens is they tied in your giving with your position as elder, then there will be bitterness
Yeah.
in that, in that person, but also that will, just pervade throughout the elder board or session, whatever you call it in your church, and then throughout the church. Peter drew that fence, and it was tight. He didn't make anything unclear. He thought you could get the Spirit of God with money. That's bitterness. That's the gall of bitterness. I think that has a lot to do with people's now perception of entitlement. People thinking they deserve something. They are owed something. I think this is why we have all these movements. But it's shown not just in the social movements of today, but like I said before, even in maybe if you think that you could give money to something, you are owed something in return, like a position of office in the church or something to that effect.
Yeah.
That has everything to do with bitterness. This idea that I'm owed something, and there's no humility in bitterness. And in the gall of bitterness would mean what, Sam?
I know that gall is like a poison.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding.
I mean, it's the bitterness of bitterness. It's like in the deepness of the bitterness, right? So gall is something bitter. So in the gall of bitterness would just be like he's in deep bitterness is what Peter is saying. So I think people imagine people that are bitter to be people that speak harshly or
Yeah.
who snap back at you. So why are you so bitter, right? But it comes down to people thinking they deserve something. So they're owed something because they do something. And I think that is why we have such a difficult time with bitterness, because we can't even define the word bitterness correctly. But Acts chapter 8 shows us a great example of what bitterness is.
So in the Hebrew text that you brought up, Hebrews 12:15, the author, who might be Paul, I don't know, to be honest, says the root of bitterness. When it's saying the root of bitterness, I mean, a root is something that lodges in you, and it seems like the root is this thing that just kind of clings to you. Is that how we're supposed to see bitterness? Like, what is that?
Oh, it's juxtaposed and, really contrasted with the grace of God. What's grace? Grace is unmerited favor. And so we have something that we do not deserve given to us. Bitterness is thinking like we do deserve something. This is why the rich man and Lazarus clearly played out the differences between someone who has received grace, which was Lazarus, and someone who was still in that root of bitterness or the gall of bitterness. When he thinks that he still deserves something, he's owed something. It was God's fault that he's in hell, and he's owed, let's say, even a dip of the finger in water so that he could get some relief from that pain, right? The torment that he's in hell. So even in hell, people are still in bitterness. But people in heaven know that what they have obtained is not by their own merit, but it is by the grace of God that they're there. And so I think they are posed in contrast because one leads you to gratitude and the other leads you to continued desecration, defilement, just hatred toward God. And that's what bitterness is. Bitterness is hatred toward God.
That's a very, very strong statement to make. Too strong. Very, too nicely, too strong. It's like it's nice. So, I mean, just to kind of sum it up, you're saying that bitterness is dangerous because it is tied with greed. It is tied with entitlement. Bitterness is hatred towards God, because if you're bitter, you're not understanding and really believing perhaps, or remembering perhaps, the grace that you have been given. And this is a root that kind of is stuck in your heart and it just stays there. Is that why it's so dangerous?
Yeah, there's no satisfaction with people who have the root of bitterness inside them. Even if I demanded something and I believe that I'm entitled or I'm owed something. Once I receive it, I'm not grateful because I believe I was owed that. So if let's say you owe me $10 and then
Oh
you
my
give me
goodness.
$10 back, I'm not going to be like, wow, this is such a great gift. I'm going to say, okay, you know,
I'm just
good thing you
paying you
gave it
back.
back. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not a thing. But whereas if I wasn't owed $10 or I owed you $10 and then
Oh,
you give me $10 on top of that, there's reason for gratitude. There's reason for joy because this is not something I was owed. In fact, I wasn't owed. It was unmerited what I received, which is grace. And so the people of God receive grace. And people who don't know God are in this bitter, like, state because they believe that they're owed something from God when God actually doesn't owe them anything except wrath. And so in hell, you'll still be in that state of bitterness and you'll take the full force of God's wrath for all eternity.
I feel like $10 is kind of like an aged example. You can't really buy anything for $10 now.
Really?
Not even Chipotle.
Yeah, I went to
You,
McDonald's yesterday
yeah.
and I got a Big Mac meal. It was $13.
See, it's unhealthy and expensive. It's just like a lose-lose.
Yeah, so I needed to get 20 nuggets on top of that. So I did
You might as well.
to kind of balance it out.
You talked about gratitude and gratefulness and understanding God's grace as kind of maybe the antidote. Is that how we work on our bitterness? We just are reminded of the gospel, reminded of the grace that we have received. Is that the antidote, the cure for this gall of bitterness?
I think so. In a degree, definitely is. If you understand prosperity, you're not bitter because you're prosperous, right? And maybe Proverbs 14:10 will help too.
Proverbs 14:10 reads, "The heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy."
I think it has something to do with also the expression, the sharing of joy. You can be grateful, but that gratefulness needs to be expressed. And so you share joy. What people that are bitter cannot do is share their joys, right?
Yeah.
They only share gripes. So what comes out of your mouth, what comes out of your expressions, if it's a joyful expression, then you know that you have been given grace. If it's not, then perhaps you need to check yourself
Mm.
and there is bitterness trying to take root in your life.
So, you've been a senior pastor for quite some time. You've been in pastoral ministry for quite some time. And I'm sure you've had to counsel young men and women who've had bitterness or anger towards another member in the church or just really towards God, like you were saying before. What are some approaches, maybe some practical approaches that you've given, maybe some wisdom that can help us as we are trying to get out of this poison, get out of this root, or just deroot? Is that right? Deroot, unroot this bitterness. What are some practical tips and wisdom that you can give us in that regard?
Well, I think the first things first for me, it's definitely do not stop gathering with the saints. Once you're bitter, I think what they want to do is just go into their own corners and then go with like minded people who are also bitter, perhaps, just to complain about their bitterness.
Yeah,
And I think this is easier now because of social media. You could go into your own enclaves of whatever you made to shout out your bitterness to people. And then that doesn't help. I mean, look at social media. Look at what people post. They're not happy. You see bitterness continue to increase, anger continue to increase because they believe that they're entitled
mm,
to something for whatever reason.
yeah, yeah,
Gathering with the saints helps you exercise love for your neighbor and express gratitude to God. And so I think these two things are incredibly important for the saint to remember. If you're not exercising and expressing, there's danger that's bound to happen. I think the first thing that people want to do is when they get, when something bad happens to them, bitterness tries to take over and then you want to, not gather with the saints. You don't want God, and that's the dangerous part. In fact, more than ever, you should gather with the saints. Then more
Mm.
than ever, you should cry out to God for His presence and His help.
Yeah.
I wish, you could read Genesis 4 and can't help but to wish Cain did that before he murdered his brother Abel.
Abel.
And so bitterness taking root brings forth, like you mentioned before, all these terrible things, including murder. And James says it too, right? Because of envy, because of bitterness, you cheat, you lie, you murder.
So that's when we are gathered together, I guess, on Sundays. Is there any way that we can kind of, I don't know, work on this throughout the week? How do we work on our bitterness? Is that even possible?
I mean, you could love.
Mhm.
So one of the things that we do throughout the week is you love your neighbor. You love the people that are around you. You love your church members. And love means spending time. It means, giving them things or saying certain things. It has all these actionable things that we ought to do. And that's why it's beautiful. You can meet with somebody, get a cup of coffee. If you feel like someone had wronged you, bitterness will make you lash out at them. However, if you really have love for the person, you try to understand from perhaps their position why this may have happened. Maybe you did something inadvertently and something needs to be cleared up. Maybe there was miscommunication that you need to talk over with. But your go-to wouldn't be, I hate this person now. Your go-to would be, let me see if there's ways that I can make amends. Make amends to rectify or to reconcile. And so that's what you would go for. I think everything has to do with the other. Bitterness continues to make you navel gaze. So you more and more you look at your own hurt. You look more at your own hurt. You just continue to look at yourself. Whereas love makes you look at the other person and you look, to soothe them, to take care of the other person. That's why the gathering and the expressions are so important. Without that, there's no one you can exercise it to, right? You can just be like, oh, I'm not bitter. But if you're just at home doing nothing, you're definitely bitter.
Yeah.
You need to get out. You need to be able to love the other person. And we get to do that in a holy and wonderful manner in the church.
I feel like there's like a certain type of music that bitter people listen to.
What is that? Is it Meek Mill's?
First, his name is Meek Mill, and Meek Mill is a hype guy. But we talked about bitterness and how that is a possible result of conflict in the church. I think another possible and better result is forgiveness and reconciliation. I think there are possibly just different definitions of what forgiveness is. Some people say forgive and forget. Some people just forgive and then they bring it up again and again and again, year after year. I'm just wondering, what is the biblical definition of forgiveness? And is it always followed by reconciliation? Or are those two the same thing?
If possible.
But it's not necessarily synonymous.
What do you mean?
Like if I forgive somebody, then I'm reconciling with somebody. Is that the same thing, or are those two distinct things, forgiveness and reconciliation?
Isaiah 43:25 is what people sometimes get confused by.
Isaiah 43:25 reads, I am he who blots out your transgressions for my own sake, and I will not remember your sins.
So does he not remember then? Is it really forgive and forget? We know this to be an anthropomorphic saying. It's just a metaphorical saying more. But God can't forget. He doesn't forget things, right?
Right.
But he doesn't count it against us. It's like he forgot. So it's a metaphor to show us like it's like he had forgotten completely. That's how he will treat us. So when you forgive, we should also do the same. It doesn't mean forget, but it does mean that you won't hold it against them again if it's true forgiveness.
Right.
So this is something that time and time, maybe if people aren't in a relationship, like your wife, and
Like a
then
romantic one.
huh?
Like a romantic relationship.
Like you and your wife. Is it
Okay.
romantic? I hope so.
I try to keep it
Okay.
spicy.
But yeah, maybe you want to make sure that you don't hold it against the person,
Right.
especially when something's come again and again. However, to forget would kind of be stupid. What if this person is, in an addiction? Let's say,
Mm.
I'll give you an example. If Angela sees that you're playing FIFA over and over again and not spending any time with her, he's like, oh, I'm sorry, please forgive me. I'll spend time with you. And next day you do it again. It's not like she's going to go and talk to you saying, look, you said you do this. And you're like, how dare you remember that? You're supposed to forget.
Right.
That's not how things work, right?
Uh-huh.
It means we don't hold it against them, meaning now when we forgive, we want our relationship completely restored. So the idea is about reconciliation. The idea is that we come to a place where we can love each other while not holding anything back. And so the idea of forgiving and forgetting is not what we're talking about. And it's
Yeah.
not what the Bible talks about either.
Yeah.
It's talking about not holding it against the person, meaning now our relationship is fully restored. So if it's fully restored, we can now move on. We can grow in love. We can grow in our communication. We can grow in our expressions of love for one another. And that we can, continue to have a joyful life together, like you and your wife, right? But it's not about forgetting per se.
But I think there is a difference in bringing up past mistakes in a way of holding someone accountable for what they have now promised versus just bringing it up out of, like we said, bitterness, right? And so what is that distinction?
Yeah. So if you continue to bring something up, then in the way you said it, if it's bitterness, then there is no forgiveness in the first place. And so you'd want to hold it against them so that you can have power over them, some kind of domination over them. And then wives can do it in front of their husbands, or husbands can do it, to oppress their wives as well. So any spouse can do it over the other person. That's not what love is. Love isn't trying to lord over some kind of status or, what you have over the other person. Love is going from underneath and serving them and lifting them up. And so this is what you want truly a couple to be showing. Just as Jesus served us, we want to serve each other.
So when we're trying to understand forgiveness, would the definition that you kind of gave prior, would that be fair, saying that forgiveness is not counting someone's wrongs against them? Is
Okay.
that what forgiveness would be?
Sure.
In that case, what would reconciliation be? Because I feel like forgiveness and reconciliation are oftentimes closely tied together. So what is reconciliation?
Yeah, reconciliation, to reconcile is to change statuses. You were once enemies, or you were once people that were embittered against each other. And now you're not. Now you have a different status. You're in a position where you can love one another. You're in a position where you can serve one another. And in the case of the people of God and God, reconciliation means now that we can fully worship God that in a way we ought to, and God will, continue to lead us as his people. So because we are reconciled to God, we won't get his wrath, we'll instead get his favor.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we look forward to and that we are excited by, Living in the favor of God is something very exciting.
And this example of God's forgiveness is what is to serve as our model as we forgive, right?
Yes, it's in the Lord's Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive us the debts as we forgive our debtors.
Yeah.
You can't get away from this notion that if we don't forgive, then we will not be forgiven, or we are not forgiven people. Because people who know to the depths of what they have been forgiven for live a life of just deep gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you really knew the depravity of your sin, the depths of just how, defiled your heart really was, and how God changed you, how
Yeah.
he forgave you, how he's going to transform you, how he has assured a place for you, a sinner, in heaven, in eternity with him and his favor, where you'll be the witnesses of the end of Psalm 23 verse 6, where it says, surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That is That's an incredible, joyous, just promise that we've been given. And so you would live it out, with that truth.
Yeah.
You live your life according to that truth. And if you're not living your life according to that truth, and you're still embittered with one another, you're still like not forgiving one another, then the Bible is showing us that we don't know what we've been forgiven of, perhaps because we haven't been forgiven.
Yeah.
We are still in our sins. We are still in the gall of bitterness, like Peter said to Simon Magus.
I'm wondering, because we're talking about forgiving and not counting it against them. It just, crossed my mind. Is forgiving always not counting it against them? Because, if we consider the biblical grounds for divorce, unfaithfulness, neglect, and the like. When we consider that, let's just say a spouse is unfaithful to his or her spouse, um, and there is a divorce because of that. But the person says, I forgive you, but there are still consequences to your actions, right? Does that necessarily mean that they did forgive them? Or does forgive always have to come with not counting it against them?
No, obviously there are consequences. There was an instance when someone tried to assassinate the Pope and they went to jail. The Pope forgave them,
Yeah.
but he wasn't like take them out of jail.
Mm.
I would believe it would be the same for any of us. If you commit the crime, you do the time.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that you're not forgiven, meaning we don't hold it against you. But there are laws in place so that justice is carried out, and to make sure that you don't do it again, that you're truly penitent when you are released. So there's a period of time that needs to take place to prove that you are truly penitent. Otherwise, you could be like, oh, you murdered my kid, I forgive you. There are no consequences. Then you continue to go on murdering people. We need to stop that person from murdering. So for the sake of other people, I think to the point that you're trying to make, the difference really is, am I looking for the needs, or am I looking after the needs of the other person, or am I more focused on myself and the heart that I have? Well, I don't want to be hurt again. And that's my bigger concern. If that's my bigger concern, then I think that's the dangerous part. When people continue to bring up stuff in the past, like, oh, I forgive you, but they just can't help bring up stuff in the past. First of all, they haven't forgiven you, even though they say it. And second of all, it's a really gazing thing that they're doing.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to be hurt, maybe because of trauma. I don't know. Whatever the case is, even if it was trauma, you have to admit that it's not healthy what you're doing. And so you continually bring up the past because what you're doing is bringing up that hurt because you can't get over it. That needs to be laid down before the cross, because whatever anybody has done to you can't even hold a candle to what you have done against God. And so that's why we talked about in 1 Corinthians, don't sue one another. If you have to if you have to lose out a little on something, a deal, then lose out a little on something on a deal. This is your brother we're talking about. This is your sister we're talking about. And you should cover them instead of trying to one-up them, which is what the Corinthians were doing, which is not what people who are in love do. You don't try to one-up them. That one-upsmanship is really out of bitter rivalry, not, an agape, self-sacrificing love.
So I'm just curious, then how do we distinguish between being a pushover as a Christian and forgiving? Because, I feel like, or I think rather, if we just say, hey, it's okay. I know you hurt me this way, but it's okay. You're hurt again. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And it keeps on going on and on and on. At what point do we say no? Like, I'm just wondering, at what point do you just kind of not be a pushover and say, hey, I think this is wrong and this needs to be corrected, and I'm not forgiving you because you're not changing? Like, is there ever a chance like that, or a scenario like that? Or how do we kind of navigate this? Because I feel like people might think, well, I've forgiven them so many times, and yet they do the same thing over and over and over again. Am I to always forgive them? Or at what point do I start looking out for myself, if ever?
Isn't Peter the one that asked Jesus, how many times should I forgive my neighbor? Should I forgive him 7 times? Right?
Yeah.
He thought it was a big thing to do 7.
Yeah.
And Jesus said it was 7 times 7.
Yeah.
Right? Or 77 times 7.
Yeah.
When you start counting, then you know something's off. That's all. Jesus goes beyond what people were counting. Even though you think you're magnanimous, you're the gracious one, you know. It's like when the emperor would yell at his sister in Gladiator. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie Gladiator. He yells at her sister, "Am I not merciful?" Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can look it up on YouTube. It's like a scene I love watching. Because in his mind, he believed that he was being merciful, and yet here he was derangedly screaming at his sister because he has all these like just evil thoughts.
Yeah.
Inappropriate, evil, yeah, whatever it was, immoral. He had all these things. He was just a terrible and an immoral emperor. But I mean, that's what it is. When you can't forgive someone, you're the one that's going to start changing for the worse. And so when you realize what God has done for you and what God is doing for you, then you don't do these things because of who you are, what God has done for you. And it's Christ who also said, if someone strikes you on the right cheek,
Yeah.
and turn to him your left. Where's
Yeah.
that?
Huh?
Where is that?
Somewhere in the Gospels.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
true.
and the reason why I even ask this is because I have heard of an example where in school, this individual was slapped in the face.
Mhm.
And they said, "Hey, you're a Christian. Aren't you going to show me your other cheek?"
Mhm.
In that scenario, I mean, I don't know. For me, it seems like one answer is kind of being a pushover.
Mhm.
How do you respond to that? And the reason why I keep on asking this is because even in the example of divorce, right? If we are to forgive, then shouldn't we forgive all the time? And shouldn't there not be then any grounds for biblical divorce? You know what I mean? Like, how do we distinguish between not being a pushover, forgiving, and at the same time allowing the other person to understand that there are repercussions to their actions? If that makes sense.
Let's look at it in context then. Let's actually look at Matthew chapter 5 and then look at that passage in context.
So this is Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 to 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you.
What Jesus is saying here is transformative, it's revolutionary, because what would happen after I slap you on the right cheek, that means I backhand you, is what, or, you know, maybe you could be slapped on the left cheek, but it's in front of millions of viewers on TV, right?
Yeah.
That personal insult demands an escalation.
Uh-huh.
And Jesus is going turn to the other cheek. Although the point of it is for de-escalation. It's not so that you take this personal offense. All of these, by the way, are personal offenses. You take this personal offense and then you reciprocate in kind or you escalate, which is what normally you would do.
Yeah.
If you get slapped in the face, then you'd have to return it with a punch in the face. It's not a slap for slap that happens.
Right.
It always gets harder and harder, right? It always gets worse and worse. Jesus is saying you suffer injury. Why? Why do you suffer injury then? What's the goal? Okay, so what's the trajectory of if you escalate violence? And so if you get slapped on the right cheek, what should you do? It's a dishonor to your name. I would imagine you'd battle them to death or you have a duel of some kind, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then what would happen then is there's a constant escalation to violence and even death. That de-escalation, what is that pointing to? When you turn to them the other cheek, it would have shocked the other person when they won't take personal offense. So this is not a recipe that Jesus is saying, if someone slaps you, this is what you must do. He was actually going against what people were doing, saying this was the letter of the law, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And he was saying that there's a goal to this, there's a trajectory. So if you get slapped on the right cheek, what should your trajectory be? It should be toward love and peace.
Mm.
That's why it was so revolutionary. By turning the other cheek would have shocked the listeners into understanding that, well, you don't fight them to the death right now. If someone slaps me on the cheek right now, I'm going to kill them. I don't care who you are. That's what people would have thought. Many
Yeah.
people here would also think. So people would think, oh, people who don't do that is weak. In fact, Jesus was saying the opposite. People who do that and cannot control their emotions and constantly escalate things into violence and murder and death, those are the weak people. The truly strong are the people that would follow Christ and his ways, is to not escalate, but to de-escalate any kind of tense situation toward a peaceful, point or goal, right? And so, are you shocked that someone slapped you? Don't be shocked. Turn the other cheek. Don't return insult for insult. But it's to not just avoid, but to promote. So it's not just avoiding violence. And so I think there was a story that I once heard, like Gandhi was walking down with a Christian missionary, and there was a group of young no-gooders, right? And then the Christian missionary would cross the street, and then Gandhi would respond to him, well, didn't your Christ teach you if you were to get slapped to turn the other cheek? So why would we avoid this situation? And then people really respected Gandhi for that. I think that's a misunderstanding of the verse. It's not about avoiding or not avoiding. The whole point is the trajectory and the goal. The end goal is for peace. For the Christian, it's to be a peacemaker, right? And for the non-Christian, you would see that you can't help, because there's no self-control, that you would go toward war. Again, this is not talking about pacifism. This is not talking about avoiding or not avoiding, whatever the case is. It's not about avenging your honor. It's not about any of those things. It's about going toward peace. And that's what reconciliation is. It's reconciliation because it's peace with God. And now I can live a life with love for one another. And that's what we want. We want our society to be reconciled to each other. But we don't see that in the political realm, because no one is going to turn the other cheek, because they know that they're going to be viewed as weak and they're going to be stepped all over, which is probably true, right? And so what you see happening is a constant escalation in the political narrative, where now if you believe one side, you're a Nazi. You're obviously not a Nazi, but you're equated with Nazi, or you're equated with fascism. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I said, these are all these fascistic kind of policies that are being set forth in recent days. And then he asked me, and this is a smart guy, he asked me, hey, what is fascism? Because we've been throwing around all these words in the political discourse. We don't even know why we do it sometimes. So I had to explain what fascism was. And it's like military rule. It's where you're compelled by the government to do all these things that they demand you to do. That's a fascistic government. That's actually what we see in Shanghai right now, where they're on lockdown. They can't get out. They closed all their stores because of the scare of COVID, and people can't pay their rent. They can't feed their families. Some people I saw on the internet had elderly parents that they couldn't take care of because no one can go inside their apartment because of this lockdown, and there's no food. So he's like saying that it's been like a week since they had no food, and I can't even get to them because of this lockdown. What are you doing? And so that's a fascistic government. Those are things that we see where you can call it communist all you want. It's just fascism, where you have to, continue on in a way of violence and disorder, and all this strife comes out.
Is forgiveness something that is conditional upon the other party's repentance?
I think, depending on the degree, I would imagine that if someone is constantly, let's say, putting you or your family in danger, forgiveness does not entail you letting them continue to abuse you or your neighbor or your family, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's what the mistake would be in that kind of line of thinking. If you mean by forgive, then you're moving toward a place of reconciliation, then yeah, I think you should continue to do that. It does mean correcting bad behavior. Another recent example could be where people have been, just hitting people over the head randomly in New York City.
Hmm.
Like I saw this one picture of someone just hitting someone in the back of the head with a hammer while she was going
What
down
in
the
the
subway
world?
stairs,
Yeah.
the steps to the subway station, and that's terrible.
Yeah.
Uh, is the first thing in your mind that we need to forgive this person? That's not forgiveness. You need to bring that person to justice. And then that person who did that other person wrong can forgive them, meaning they are not going to hold it against them. They don't want to see their downfall, but rather they want to see them succeed and turn away from those
Mm,
things.
mm.
Um, and so I'm sure that you've seen some testimony to that regard, but I think that's just a misunderstanding of what forgiveness is. If someone, not you, just someone were to think that forgiveness means there are now no consequences to the actions that you take. And
Yeah.
I hope we've established that that's not the case. If you do something wrong, there is justice that needs to take place. Forgiveness then would mean, in that scenario, would mean that I don't want harm to befall you. I would rather you turn, repent, do the right thing, and uh, eventually be reconciled. But there needs to be some kind of rehabilitation first, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So this whole thing where people don't understand Christianity and think that Christians are people who just continue to get pummeled on is incorrect. In fact, during the American Revolution, people were confused who didn't know Christianity, because after preaching from the pulpit, it was Presbyterian ministers who would take off their robe and don their gun and then go out into the battlefield to fight in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
And so, people have this odd notion of tying forgiveness to weakness. In fact, true forgiveness is for the truly strong. And it can only be done if you've been given strength and you recognize what you have been forgiven of.
Thank you for that. I think that's a lot of truth for us to munch on this week as we think about forgiveness and reconciliation and bitterness. If you have any further questions, we'd love to answer them. Or actually, Pastor Eugene, you'd love to answer them, I bet. So email us at podcast@cgsnj.org. And now we have a couple questions that have been sent in. And so we'll go into a quick time of Q&A.
We need a beat.
A couple,
That's the media.
yeah,
Give me a beat. That's the Q&A.
give me a beat, yeah.
Okay.
A couple weeks ago, Pastor Eugene, in one of your sermons, you talked about pharmakeia and sorcery. And that's where we get the word pharmaceutical, correct?
Yes.
Would this include the abuse of prescription drugs like antidepressants, ADHD meds, and maybe perhaps even anti-anxiety medication that are very common?
I think it's complicated now because of just how readily this form of medication is accepted
Yeah.
by especially young people. I think I said it in this podcast too, but I was counseling this one person whose psychiatrist prescribed antidepressant meds.
Uh-huh.
And I had told this person, please, think twice before taking it. It's one thing if you're suicidal, but it's another thing if, this is, perhaps, what depression doesn't affect someone's day to day? It's going to affect your day to day.
Yeah.
And so to fight through it, to pray through it, it's a spiritual battle for us. And so don't do it alone, do it with people, and make sure you have your wits about you. Sometimes I believe that pain is necessary for us to recognize the severity of our situation. To numb that pain isn't always good. Sometimes it's necessary for you to function, just to even eat or sleep, and I get that. So there are varying degrees of discernment that needs to take place before we take medication.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not on either extreme where
Mhm.
you take medication as soon as, like, your head kind of hurts a little, you just pop on a Tylenol. I'm not there, and I'm not on the other side as well where you never take Tylenol. But it really depends. I think there's a level of discernment that's needed. Pharmakeia, what I really meant by that, when the Bible talks about sorcery, is a state of inebriation that you're put in, a state of, not reality. You're in this, I don't know, a place of flux where you think that you can now feel the whole spiritual realm,
Mm.
and people believe that they get inspiration from doing all these drugs.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
something that God strictly forbids in the Bible. He doesn't want you to get inebriated and to figure things out. He wants you to be alert and be sober minded. People have a misconception, again, a misunderstanding of that Bible verse. Do not get drunk, but be filled with the Holy Spirit, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So people think that it's being drunk in the Spirit now. This is what the charismatics have used, and this is a complete misreading of the Bible. Drunkenness is sinful. How would drunkenness in the Spirit be any different where you're inebriated when the Bible is talking about being alert and sober minded? The Spirit makes us alert and sober minded. The Spirit does not make or put us in an inebriated state. And so, in any kind of state of inebriation, we need to be extra careful. So, if you have to be put down, right, for whatever reason, maybe you need to get surgery and then the pain will be too much for the surgeon to do their procedure properly, then, you'll be knocked out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't have anything against that. That's fine. But if you don't even have that and you just get knocked out for no reason because you just can't handle the world, how is that healthy? In fact, I would go as far as to say that it's evil, that you're not doing the things that God has called you to do because now you're in this state of just not being able to function at all, right? And so, whether it's antidepressants or painkillers or whatever the case is, be very careful. I wouldn't take those lightly. I wouldn't even use the world standards to take any kind of medication to that effect.
Mm.
And I think that's why we need a lot of prayer, especially during this time, because you continue down that line where you think any kind of medication is fine because of what science or technology or whatever. Then why not do the more extreme procedures like gender affirmation surgery or
Mm.
something to that effect, right?
That's
We-
what it's called. Gender affirmation surgery.
it's a euphemism because they don't want to say what it really is, which is destroying your reproductive organs.
Yeah.
Um, and it's an incredibly sad thing that people have now gone to because they believe that because of the science, we can do whatever we want to our bodies to match what we are feeling. That's not true. And so, I'll specifically mention the antidepressants because you mentioned it, where people that have been on it, I have counseling sessions with people like that. It's they readily admit themselves this is a numbing. It doesn't change your situation. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't
Yeah.
alleviate your situation. It just
Right.
numbs you
Right.
to the anxiety that you once had. I think the question is, why are you anxious first, not numbing that anxiety? Right? When Jesus goes, do not be anxious, and you're anxious, you have to recognize that you're in a place of sin then. If you're anxious, and Jesus said, don't be anxious. The Bible does say, rejoice always. And if you're not always rejoicing, meaning in the gathering, the people are in a place of rejoicing. And if you're not rejoicing in that sense, then there is something that you need to ask yourself. That's why I'm saying pain isn't always bad. It can alert us to the severity of our situation. So sometimes you need that kind of pain to show you, hey, I need to get out of this slump real quick, but because it's really dangerous. I think it's a great thing if you're on, let's say, a rickety bridge crossing a crazy abyss, right? That you're on alert and that you're not just wobbling across like nothing because you drank like 5 bottles of liquor to get across that bridge,
Yeah.
you should be alert. And that's a good thing. If it adds extra stress to your life, then great. That stress might save your life. So I really think it takes discernment. This is something that I think our generation needs to pray for. Pray that you get discernment so that if you are in pain, that you're not facing this pain alone, that you're with your brothers and sisters who will rejoice with you and will weep with you, but at the same time will stir you up to love and good works, right? So we need people around us like that. Our first go-to should not be medication. In fact, it should be prayer. And medication could come, it's possible, but it wouldn't be something that I would immediately snap to if I have like some kind of slight pain for whatever reason.
Thank you for that. There was a current event that happened. There was a news story that broke in the past 2 weeks that I thought we should go over. And this news story comes out of Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill, where there were 5 unborn fetuses found in an apartment where an anti-abortion activist had been staying. And so the story is that there was a discovery made of 5 unborn fetuses in this apartment. And this is where anti-abortion activist Lauren Handy had supposedly stayed. And this is quite an interesting story. According to Miss Handy, these 5 fetuses were among a total of 115 fetuses that the anti-abortion group called Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising obtained from a Washington, D.C. clinic's medical waste. So the story goes that they went to this abortion center and they saw a driver for this medical waste company, and they took one of the 3 boxes that this medical waste company was taking to the incinerator, and they brought it back to their apartment, and it was 115 fetuses, and they buried 115 of them, but 5 of them they kept without burying them because they thought that these 5 were evidence of violation of federal laws, including the Partial Birth Abortion Act, which bans certain methods to terminate pregnancy starting at 12 weeks. And so they kept these 5 fetuses as evidence of illegal abortion. And now there are letters being sent to Washington, D.C. authorities. There's a letter from 23 House and Senate Republicans to the D.C. authorities to investigate how these 5 unborn children died. And this is part of the letter. Based on evidence collected at the time of recovery and photos that have been publicly shared, all 5 of these children appear to have developed well past the point of viability and likely suffered severely painful abortion procedures, though without an autopsy, it is not known how each child died. And so right now there is a movement for the DC authorities to investigate how these unborn children had died. Was it really illegal abortion procedures? And this story has been breaking for the past 2 weeks, and I'm sure that you have thoughts on this, Pastor Gene.
I think it's still breaking, so we'll find out more as time goes on. So I hope that people will keep up. And I asked you to bring this story up, if only because I would hope that our listeners will keep track of this story above anything else. I think this is maybe one of the more important stories of the day. We have all these other things that will be, will be shown in the media, like Ukraine and COVID, things like that, right? Or Elon Musk taking over Twitter, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so I believe that this is so pivotal for us to really see how the world is going to respond to what is going on here. Like you said, these were babies that had been killed, could be inside or outside the womb. Autopsies need to be done to figure that one out. If you've seen the videos and pictures, they're quite graphic, and the way that these babies were killed they were grossly inhumane. Yeah, I saw one where they tried to sever the spinal cord, I suppose, and there are multiple lacerations in the back of the baby's head. And then, these are not ways that you can murder somebody and then get away with it. I think we need to see how people are going to respond, see how people will either repent from this or go into further depravity because they believe that they have a right to an abortion. It's all euphemisms now, whether it's gender affirming surgery or women's health care, that people are going to use to mask what is truly evil in the world. And so I think this is very sad. And the way people are responding is, a telltale sign of where they are as far as their morality or their moral compasses. So, yeah, I just wanted you to say it. Thank you for sharing that. This is something that I'm praying about, that our nation will come to terms with and repent of. That means we need to change our laws and policies. We need to get rid of Roe versus Wade, or the Obergefell decision. We need to get rid of all these ungodly and demonic ideologies that we are adopting, because these will inevitably lead to the downfall of the nation. It will cause great harm to its people. And we need to be purveyors of the truth. We got to tell people that this is wrong. I'm shocked that there are Christians out there that would celebrate now who has been confirmed to the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson, right?
Yep.
And they would celebrate that when she is an advocate for the murder of babies, and that's exactly what it is. You can't just willy-nilly murder a baby because you don't want to have the baby.
Right.
It's still a life.
Yeah.
And I'm glad for these pro-life activists who are bringing this to light. I don't care if you're black, white, Asian. If you are for the murder of babies, you have no right to be a judge in this nation or any nation, because you are promoting evil, not good. And so I don't celebrate that nomination. And I'm sad that, Christians would not be able to see through this. This is a grave evil that our country is doing. And there will be repercussions. There's going to be a payback that's going to come if we continue to let this evil, grow.
Yeah. And we'll be tracking this story this upcoming week as well. Now, we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we talk about what a male is and what a female is. Pastor Gene, neither of us are biologists here, but we will be talking about male and female distinctions and the beauty of God's creation. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. Peace.
Can we
This
just
upcoming
quote Kindergarten
Monday.
Cop and get it over with?
Who is Kindergarten Cop?
It's a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 80s or 90s.
Oh, wow.
And the kindergartner stands up and says, boys have penises, girls have vaginas.
Yeah, I don't think that'll make the cut, but
Sam.